The category is What the Trans, darlings?
Hello, greetings, and a very time zone appropriate salutation to you, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the trans? I'm
Yes.
a little bit tired, but I'm going to be fine, I'm sure.
Absolutely. No, I'm sure absolutely nothing can possibly go wrong given how very, very tired both of us are on so many levels. But yes, you're tired. You've been a busy bee, haven't you?
I have. I was doing a workshop today covering body confidence stuff and podcasting. Yeah, it was tremendous fun. How are you doing? Why are you a bit sleepy?
Yeah, I've just not been sleeping very well over the last couple of nights. But, it's nothing to worry about. It's just been a circumstance thing. So, all is well. I would be a little bit more specific, but I have been doing some stuff that I can't really talk about. So I'm just going to have to skip over that, I'm afraid. But yeah, I'm all right. All is well, and I hope you are all well too, darling listeners.
I do love that you have secret projects sometimes that you can't talk about.
Yes, well, I will be able to in 2 weeks, so we'll talk about it then.
You heard it here first. What the Trans exclusive. All about what the hell Ashleigh's been doing.
As if anybody's particularly interested in what I've been doing.
I think I know a few things about this, so I think I'm very interested in hearing more.
Well, you and I will have that discussion when the microphones are off then. How about
I keep
that?
forgetting the microphone is on. I completely forgot. I didn't know where I was. I thought we were just having a chat.
No, that's the way to do it. And so, if any of Michelle's students are listening, this is the vibe you want, really. You kind of want to forget that the microphone is there.
Yeah.
But obviously the reason we have a microphone in the first place is because this is a podcast, so we should probably get on with doing that. So starting off in our usual fashion with some terrible news.
All right, the Labour leadership contest. For those outside the UK, the current government opposition, the Labour Party, is looking for a new leader to replace the outgoing Jeremy Corbyn. Now, our party leadership elections are a lot more sedate than they have in the US. Mostly they consist of candidates talking to someone who is wearing a high vis whilst they are standing next to a ditch. It can be a pretty dull affair all around. However, we here on the show think it is important to dissect where the candidates stand on all of the various trans and non-binary related issues, because one of these people could well become the Prime Minister. And if you happen to be a member of the Labour Party, you get to vote on who gets to be leader. So it's probably good for you to know where they stand on trans and non-binary stuff. Now, we've reached out to all four of the current candidates with a whole heap of questions, and thus far, none of them have gotten back to us with anything specific or any answers to our questions. However, we have received some communications from various PR people saying that we may get something for the next episode or another future episode. So as soon as we get the answers, we will put them out there on the social medias and cover them in depth on the next available show. So first up is Lisa Nandy, MP for Wigan, who just scraped onto the ballot on Wednesday the 22nd, yesterday at time of recording. She is more of a centre-left candidate, but it is important to know that she is of mixed heritage and is a woman of colour. When it comes to transgender issues, there is, at time of recording, very little to go on. She has written a piece for Politics Home, linked in the description, where she correctly challenged the Conservative Party's alleged plan to use LGBT issues to create a culture war in an attempt to entice northern working-class voters in the last general election. In the piece, she said, "In Wigan, I have been inspired by the LGBT plus young people who have had to battle for fair and equal treatment and have shown huge bravery in standing up to discrimination, hostility and bullying. Their response was to set up a pride parade in the face of some strong resistance only a few years ago. Now the whole town and every generation turn out to support it. The characterization of northern working class towns as intolerant could only have been dreamt up by someone who has never been to one."
I just, on a personal note, because I grew up in Wigan, I kind of want her to win just on that kind of basis, but the point that she's made is that young LGBT people just a few years ago started off Wigan Pride, and, my response to the kind of stuff that I was experiencing in Wigan was to run away. So, read into that what you will. But yeah, next we have Emily Thornberry, MP for Islington South and Finsbury, who is in the current Shadow Cabinet as the Shadow First Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs. Snappy job title. Now, she has been fairly outspoken about supporting the LGBT community. According to a report from Pink News in September 2018, Thornberry was asked about the then recent wave of TERF resignations from the party in protest of Labour's inclusion of trans women on women's-only candidate shortlists. She responded by saying, Sometimes people say, what about all women shortlists? There's going to be a whole load of men turning up in dresses and insisting on being considered a candidate. Really? Really? Let's leave it to the good sense of local parties. They will decide who they're going to have on their shortlist and who they aren't. They will know people who are genuinely struggling with their identity and people who can contribute to Parliament and who would be good representatives of their community. I think we can be a little more relaxed about it. I think it's desperately sad to see the way it's become so aggressive and we need to step down a bit. She went on to say that feminism is big enough to accommodate trans women and, again, as yet, we can't find anything concrete on whether she supports, as it were, self-ID or trans youngsters and so on. But currently she has made it clear that she is not on the side of the TERFs, which is not something to be sniffed at. And of course, we will update you when we know a little more.
All right, next, Rebecca Long-Bailey, MP for Salford and Eccles, and current Shadow Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. She is the second favourite to win the contest, trailing the current favourite, Keir Starmer, by a fraction of a percent. In many, many polls. She is very much on the left of the party, and she has thus far been the most unequivocal in her support for trans rights and has specifically endorsed quote-unquote self-ID. In an interview with the BBC's Laura Kunsberg, when she was asked, are transgender women women, Long-Bailey said yes, very quickly. She also confirmed her support for quote-unquote self-ID when Kunsberg pressed her on the issue, and Long-Bailey gave an astonishingly thoughtful answer saying, I mean, going through transition as a trans person, it's a very, very difficult process, and speak to people who've been through the process themselves, and self-IDing is a first step in that process for many. And we've got to respect and understand that we have to let people be who they want to be and respect their choices. So thus far, if we had to recommend a candidate based solely on the current level of information we have, Rebecca Long-Bailey would be the one, because as it stands, she has come out for trans rights unambiguously, and she has specifically said that self-ID should be the law.
And so finally we come to the aforementioned current frontrunner, albeit not by much, and of course it is the cis white guy Keir Starmer, who is the MP for Holborn and St Pancras and current Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. Ugh. Obviously, we've been known to like cis men here on the podcast, but I think it is safe to say that if we had to choose, we would probably want one of the women who are running to lead the party, because a woman has never actually led the Labour Party, which is fucking wild, given that the Tories have had two. Anyway, in his favour, he was the first candidate to openly declare support for trans equality, albeit not in a way that went into any specifics when it comes to the GRA or healthcare or trans youngsters or whatever. But in a video that was tweeted out by Will Roney, an LGBT officer for Labour Stevenage, Keir Starmer said that he is concerned about trans issues being used as a political football and made his support for trans people very clear. Here is an audio from that video.
We have instinctively, therefore, to protect and defend. And we mustn't make it a political football. And I'm really worried on this particular issue that a particularly vulnerable group is being used as a political football across the Labour Party, and we have to deal with it in a much, much better way than that. And the government has effectively now abandoned this, and so any legislative change, I think, won't come under this government, so we've got to make the argument on this loud and clear, but start from the proposition that this is a small group of people who've been subjected to incredible abuse and discrimination for a very, very long time.
So there you have it. Obviously, we would like to go into more depth with Keir Starmer about the specifics of what he intends to do for trans people if he is successful in gaining the leadership. But for now, as soon as we hear from his people, we will let you know what they come back with. So yeah, it's an interesting selection. I think it absolutely could be worse, couldn't it? Obviously, there was a candidate who was part of the race and kind of initiated the race and is at this moment no longer part of the race, which is Jess Phillips, who was running. She did a Q&A on Mumsnet, which, raised one or two alarm bells in the community, but came out broadly for trans rights and did say that trans women are women. She was a little vague on the specifics of GRA reform, but she came out broadly in favour, whilst noting that she did help write the recommendations in the first place, which obviously fucked off the users of Mumsnet, but that's a-okay by us.
Yep.
And perhaps at least partially put your mind at rest, as she had been accused of being a TERF for her previous support of Women's Place UK, who are, well, they're a hate group. However, she still invented a story where she claimed to have told Diane Abbott to fuck off. She does have a pretty spotty record on race and racial sensitivity, shall we say, in general. Diane Abbott is the UK's first and longest serving black MP, and to this day she still receives the most racist abuse from the public. So Phillips has not helped on that end of things. We thought we might have to take that into account, but as of yesterday, Wednesday 22nd of January, she has dropped out of the race. So...
Good.
Yeah, I wasn't totally sure about that. And my concern with her wasn't necessarily around the trans stuff, because, the Q&A on Mumsnet was pretty unequivocal, but it's all, someone can be really good on trans issues and be really, really bad in other ways, which still wouldn't necessarily make them the best choice for leader. And the fact is that Jess Phillips has not always done very well in terms of race and race issues and so on, sets the alarm bells ringing, even if everything she'd ever said about trans people was absolutely perfect. She is kind of on record as saying one or two, being charitable, we could say, insensitive things. So, but yes, enough of that. So obviously
yes.
We're going to be paying attention to how the rest of this leadership contest shakes out. We're going to try and speak to the candidates where we can. But yes, more news as we get it.
The thing to take away from this is that all of the candidates are broadly in favour of trans people. We may not know the specifics for some of them, but having said that, none of them appear to have said anything that is questionable or in support of hate groups, which is a bit of a win. What's your take on the candidates? Are you reasonably happy with how things have shaken out?
Yeah, I think to an extent. I mean, obviously, I think I mentioned this on the last episode, and I've certainly mentioned it to a couple of friends, is that I just wish Dawn Butler was running for leader, because she's just brilliant, essentially.
Yeah.
I would be overjoyed to see that, essentially, because not only for her support for trans people, but also in her work in a number of other areas, obviously. So, but, you kind of take what you can get. I think Rebecca Long-Bailey raised a couple of good points, and I was very, cheered up by that interview with the BBC that she did, simply because she was so kind of quick and on it and unequivocal. But we shall have to see how the rest of it shakes out. And now I think we should move on, shall we, to the next bit of the show, the meat, the big segment, which once again consists of an interview, which we were both meant to sit down and do, and then the only time one of the interviewees could do it was at a time that I couldn't. So I was a bit gutted. But I wanted to talk about intersex issues and people, because there's a certain amount of crossover, B, because there's a certain amount of misunderstanding, and C, because I've actually seen examples of trans activists arguing with intersex activists and vice versa, and a lot of real nastiness and rancor coming from both sides of that, needlessly. And I thought that it would be a good moment now to give those issues a proper platform and let some people that are affected by them speak for themselves. So we sorted out an interview, didn't we?
Yeah, and for the record, Ashleigh did most of the research and wrote the questions that I used. I just want to make that abundantly clear. The idea was that the autism stuff that we did last time would be mostly on me, and this time the intersex stuff would be mostly on Ashleigh, and it was the case, even though I'm in it, but very much this was Ashleigh pushing this through. So I want to give you all the credit because your questions were great and we got some really good answers. And the two people we talked to, tremendously good. Tremendous.
Absolutely. But just for the audience's benefit, who were the two people that we talked to?
I think that we should let them introduce themselves. So here is my interview on the subject of intersex issues. All right, guests, thank you so much for joining me. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Izzy MacCallum, and I'm an art student and intersex activist, and I run Intersexy, which is the world's first intersex club night.
Nice. What are your pronouns?
My pronouns are they, them.
Cool. Diana?
Diana James. I work within domestic abuse, same-sex domestic abuse, heterosexual domestic abuse, and I also work with various parts of the criminal justice system.
And your pronouns?
Oh, sorry, she, her.
Thank you so much for making the time to talk to me. So, when did you realise that you were intersex?
I realised that I was intersex around the time of puberty, and I just didn't have a very normal puberty. I wasn't developing in the ways that I should have been, and then I went to the doctors and they found out that I was having various hormonal things and blah 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 blah. So yeah, it was actually around puberty, which most people think it's from birth and that they're all kind of distinguished at birth, but that wasn't the case with me.
Yeah, in the reading I did, there seems to be roughly two camps: people who their status is sort of seen at birth, and then there's the people that stumble upon it later, much like you did.
Yeah.
Diana, how did you realise you were intersex?
For me too, it was puberty, but slightly different in the fact that I was always sort of thought I was ill. So from when I was very young, I seemed to be going in and out of hospital for various things that I didn't fully understand, just that I was ill and things weren't right and I weren't right. So I had that, but I was never told anything else other than that, you know, I'd been ill and they were making me better and these injections would make everything right and, you know, the operations were good for me. And then I hit puberty and I started growing breasts. I did have long hair because I just loved having long hair and would scream and shout if it wasn't let grow long. But when I was at school, I started growing breasts, which, as I was at that time at an all-boys school, created certain difficulties.
Wow, that must have been really, really hard.
Yeah, I was always kind of different at school, so I never fitted in, and I never wanted to take part in the stuff that they did. Well, boys at my school at that kind of age were always like touching each other, so they were always masturbating each other all the time, but always regarded themselves as completely heterosexual. That was a heterosexual act. That was nothing gay about it. Boys of that age did. That's how they saw it, but I was this queer kid who didn't fit in, so I got beaten up virtually every day. And then when I started growing breasts was when it sort of started turning into a different kind of abuse.
There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Beating you up because of perceived queerness, and yet they're all giving each other handies round the bike sheds. What is that?
Yeah, I'm going to say at the time I didn't know any different. I just thought that it was me that was strange. It was me. It was my fault because my parents obviously wanted something that I wasn't, and perhaps went with the doctors. When I tried to talk to them about it later on, things didn't go well, but maybe they were advised by doctors when I was born that I needed to be put right. I don't know, but I didn't get to have that discussion.
I think that's the danger of making intersex surgeries normalised and enforced, is that it gives the impression to the intersex individual that there's something wrong with them that needs fixing, when there is nothing wrong with the intersex individual. We don't need fixing at all. We're completely fine. It's the society around us that needs to change.
Yeah, and if they'd have just let me be, then I could have made my decision about my gender, or no gender, or just being happy as I was.
Yeah.
But I wasn't given that opportunity.
Yeah.
So currently in the UK, what is the situation where it comes to these correctional surgeries? Is this something that is still happening now?
I think in the UK at the moment, it's kind of blurred lines around it. I think on the whole, unless it's medically necessary in the UK, it tends not to be done. But there's not legal protection protecting intersex people from having it done. And there are a lot of enforced intersex surgeries on young children still happening, especially intersex children who are like assigned female at birth but have testes. So AIS, androgen sensitivity syndrome. Yeah, that's still going on a lot.
So difficulties that we're all so very different in many respects. There are similarities, but I've not had an enormous amount of experience. It's only been a couple of years that I've started to deal with it personally. For the folk that I've met, it seems to be that there's similarities, but also an awful lot of differences. Everybody seems to have certain differences physically.
It is a little intimidating to try and cover intersex and DSD conditions because there's loads of them. Like, I tried to get my head around as many as I possibly could, and I think I've only just managed to scratch the surface. Like, you've got Kleinheiser, you've got HRK, I believe, you've got androgen sensitivity, there's just so many.
So many. Because biological sex variations are so wide. Like, you've got gonads, you've got chromosomes, you've got hormones, you've got primary sex characteristics, and then within that there's any combination of that you can have. So you can have XY chromosomes, testes, and a vagina. You can have this. So there's so many different, like, mosaic genetics. Intersex umbrella it's a massive umbrella. And I think that's just part of the beauty of variations in species, is that there are so many different variations of sex characteristics.
There is, which of course, does also raise its difficulties later on when you start to go into relationships. How do you explain something that you find difficult explaining to yourself to someone else?
Definitely.
I think when it comes to relationships, I think that is some common ground between transgender people who are not intersex and intersex people. How has your experience as an intersex person affected or been affected by your own sense of gender?
The issue for me is being intersex but also being trans, because this is as far as I can work out from my medical stuff, is that they had a choice, and for me they picked the wrong one, and then I got injected with hormones and things as I was coming up to what would have been a puberty, although mine was late, and then I had to change it back. So for me, I seemed to cross two boundaries. And early when I was coming out, trans folk were telling me that I wasn't trans, and some intersex folk were telling me I wasn't intersex either. So it was kind of difficult to work out who I was.
That level of gatekeeping, that's just awful. But people would tell you that you weren't trans or that you weren't intersex and kind of deny you of your identity when that's so important in you figuring out that journey for yourself. It's sad when I think it does happen still a lot in the queer communities and in intersex communities that people do want to gatekeep, and I don't necessarily understand the point in that.
No, and of course being lesbian as well, then I was gatekeeped there too.
Completely. That is really frustrating. That's really that's out of order.
Yeah, it does make life a little bit difficult, because before I really went into talking about myself and how I felt being intersex, it seemed so much easier when I was just plain trans. That seemed to be easier to form relationships because that was kind of more understood. But women kind of got the idea that they knew what to expect. But when you put in that you're intersex as well, it's kind of like that they find kind of harder to get their head around.
Yeah, because it's so badly understood at the moment. Whereas transness, despite actually trans people being generally like a smaller population than intersex people, that's actually been a decent amount of exposure and education about people being trans, and there just has not been that for intersex people. In fact, there's just been medical erasure of trying to get rid of intersex stories.
Yeah, and what really hurt me was the fact that they then lost my medical records, and I had real trouble trying to piece together my own medical history.
Wow.
Is that common?
Well, apparently, as far as my doctor's a really good doctor, but my doctor said that they, UNHS, farmed out the transportation of medical records, and apparently, I don't know how many, but an awful lot of them just got lost.
Wow, that seems awfully convenient on their part that they've lost lots of medical records, especially for intersex people. That's a bit questionable.
It didn't make my life very easy, because at that time I was trying to figure out, I guess, kind of what actually set me on the path to really exploring was I got into an abusive relationship and I went into a refuge. And it's when I was there and coming out of refuge was when I was getting back to being who I was then I was going to explore everything about me. And that's when I kind of hit that barrier of medical records.
What is it that you would want people to know about being intersex?
We're just ordinary people getting on with our lives.
One thing that I think would be beneficial for people to know is that intersex variations aren't necessarily referring to someone's genitalia. So there are a wide range of sex characteristics and traits that mean someone's biology doesn't fit the typical definitions of male or female. And, it is actually a lot wider than just genitals, which I think is what most people assume. And then also that being intersex is a healthy and natural biological variance. There's nothing that there's very rare cases that anything needs to be done. It is just a natural and healthy variation. It's a part of biology, and that lots of people are intersex. And we don't need to be changed to fit into a false binary that doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wish that they left me alone.
Yeah.
And then I could have grown up and made my choices done the things that I want to do and fitted into my life without the trauma of growing up feeling wrong.
No, completely. And every child should have the opportunity to grow up just being who they are. And I think intersex people are robbed of that very often. And that needs to change.
What kind of things can crop up in later life as a result of that?
I'm going to say where to start. I can only speak personally, but the trauma is lifelong. I've lived with it, put it to the back of my mind, tried to avoid it for most of my life. But it comes out and it causes, for me, immense difficulty sometimes, both sort of physically and, of course, both the trauma of school and how I was treated growing up is part of that, and you traumatise a child and it lives with them for the rest of their life.
Izzy, do you have anything to add?
I guess the feeling that something's not right with you inherently and that you needed to be changed in whatever way, often with operations that you have like a loss of sensation in like the genitals if it's an operation in genitals, and that actually can impair your sensation for and pleasure for the rest of your life. And I think massively the psychological impact that it can have on intersex people, and massively when there is a large amount of cases where the gender identity of the individual it goes against the assigned sex that doctors have given them or hormone treatments that people have been put on, and that's heartbreaking.
It's because when you realise what's been done and what happened, you realise what could have been.
Yeah.
And you look back at, if they'd only made a different decision, then my life would have been completely different. But I don't know, from the advice they got from the doctor or surgeon or whatever, or what they wanted themselves. I don't know, because when I came out saying what I wanted to do with my life, which was to be who I was as a woman, it was kind of, I think they kind of took it as a repudiation of everything decision that they'd made, plans that they've made, things that they wanted for me.
Rather than thinking about the individual.
Yeah.
I think that is, again, something that I think a lot of trans and non-binary people who aren't intersex could maybe relate to on some level. Not that they are the same, because they're obviously very different, but...
The level of abuse, the level of rejection is very much the same. It's just some additions, some differences, that's all. But abuse and rejection for any child or young adult or adult from a family is bad.
I think also what underlines the trans narratives and intersex narratives is we want bodily autonomy at the end of the day. We both want, trans and intersex people aren't mutually exclusive, but at the end of the day, trans people and intersex people want bodily autonomy. They want they want the right to say what happens to their body, and intersex people are denied that and given operations and forced into surgeries and hormone treatments against their will or without any consent, and trans people are very often not given the healthcare services and operations that they need. One parallel is that what we both are fighting for is bodily autonomy.
Absolutely. Hormone injections that I was given when I was coming up to what would have been puberty for me was what I suppose changed my body in ways I didn't want, but also when you think of the trans men that would have been so incredibly grateful to have that option at that age. It's kind of giving it to someone who doesn't want it and denying it to those that do.
Completely. Yeah, no, it's infuriating. And when one classic TERF argument is that young trans kids are being forced on hormones and blah, 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 and that's simply not the case. And if they were actually worried about kids being forced on hormones, they should, have a little go at supporting intersex children, because that is actually a reality.
Oh, God, I can feel the anger. Yes, it's I'm kind of a placid person, but I can feel the anger from what you've said there really building in me as to what they've done to both our communities. And I straddle both, I guess, but I just cannot understand the level of incredible abuse that these poor people put out that's got nothing to do with their lives, and yet they want to impinge their own viewpoint on someone else's freedom to have, as Izzy said, their own bodily autonomy.
Well, don't you know, Diana, they read about it on Mumsnet.
Don't take me there, otherwise you're just going to get streams of bad language.
Gosh.
Thankfully, the TERFs don't listen to us because they don't have the attention span to deal with a 1 hour podcast, so it kind of works in our favour.
They're too busy scrolling on Mumsnet.
Yeah, they're far too busy to be bothering with us, so feel free to unleash. So, how can the trans community better understand and support our intersex comrades? And just a little note before you answer. You can tell Ashleigh wrote these questions.
I think by showing up to intersex rallies, any intersex fundraisers that are happening, follow intersex activists on Instagram or any social medias and keep up to date with what's going on with intersex people politically, and just listen to intersex people and their voices and their life stories. If they want to share them, don't fucking make anyone, but listen to intersex people and give them a platform like what you're doing.
Don't gatekeep.
Yeah.
Because if we cross two boundaries, which is what I have had to do and what so many other trans people have had to do, is cross those boundaries. Don't gatekeep someone that's doing the same thing, by saying you're not one of us. We don't believe that you can be intersex and trans. You've got to be one or the other. You can't be both.
That's just so unbelievably false, because with intersex people is that you're assigned something at birth. Everyone is assigned something at birth. Therefore, by your gender identity differing from what you've been assigned at birth makes you trans, right?
Yeah.
So I don't understand how people can gatekeep in that way by saying that intersex people and trans people can't overlap. I think it's actually really, really common.
Yeah, I think it is too. But as I say, that's when I first started discussing that. That's what I got.
Yeah.
There seemed to be some kind of purity thing.
That is so common in queer circles in so many ways.
Well, it's like the gold star lesbian thing. When I first came out as a lesbian, I had previously had a relationship with a guy. I'd lived with a guy for 3 years, and I soon learned not to talk about that because that was seen as a definite no-no.
I've just thought of another thing that the trans community can do to support intersex people, is that if you hear someone chatting shit about intersex people or what being intersex is, just don't hesitate to correct them, step in, speak up for us. And I certainly, as like a non-binary intersex person, I certainly speak up whenever I hear any fucking bigoted family members or people chatting shit about trans people. I think we've just got to support each other.
Damn right, and there will be links in the description with lots of information for you, listener, to read up on so you can educate yourself in preparation for these battles that you may find yourself stumbling into, and you should stumble into. But on that, I just wanted to ask something that's quite specific to this podcast. Do you think that we should also cover intersex issues? And I ask this because this is something that I have been kind of hesitant about because, one, I am not intersex and was very cautious of the idea of it appearing that I am speaking for intersex people. And two, I didn't know if it would be cool in the intersex community for a trans podcast to sort of bring intersex under that umbrella. Just because our show's called What the Trans, people might think, oh, we're saying that being intersex is the same as being trans, when in some cases they can overlap and trans people can be intersex and non-binary people can be intersex, but sometimes that isn't always the case. Do you see what I mean? So do you think we should cover intersex issues more than we have done, which is maybe a couple of times in passing at most, if I'm being generous? Do you think we should cover intersex issues? I
think it's entirely valid either way. I think if you do decide to cover intersex issues, I certainly know that me and most other intersex people that I know would really appreciate that, because I know that you do your research and you speak to intersex people, and what you would be doing would be giving us a voice and a platform and not making sure that intersex issues are being spoken about. And I see that as a positive thing, but there are always going to be people who are going to see it negatively and think, oh, well, how come this trans podcast is talking about intersex issues that, they're not intersex? But I really think if someone's going to I don't think we're in a position to be complaining about allies. That's my opinion, is that intersex people I don't think that we should be complaining about our trans siblings wanting to support us. I think as long as they're doing their research and what they're saying is coming from a good place and they're speaking to intersex people.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great thing.
Diana, what do you think?
I can't do anything but completely endorse every word that Izzy's just said. Just speak to us, and when you're going to do something, just ask someone. Ask Izzy or someone that's been in intersex advocacy for some time, who knows the issues, and just ask them. Just say, we're going to do this, what do you think? And then they can put you right on, yeah, that sounds good to us, or no, I think maybe you might want to say that a different way, or maybe that's an issue that's better left. And because we cut barriers as well, sometimes a trans story will involve intersex, as in, if I was talking about stuff that had happened to me, I crossed both boundaries, so I can't see the harm in speaking to someone who's trans but is also intersex or has similar experiences.
Fair enough. Those are all alarmingly good points, and we will obviously take those into massive consideration going forward. So, what do you think trans and intersex people can learn from each other?
Authenticity.
Yeah.
I think within trans and intersex narratives, with trans people especially, is that, figure out who you are and you do everything you can to live your life authentically, being who you are. And I think intersex people also we need to be able to fight for who we are as well.
And not to attack each other, which occasionally happens, that, you're co-opting intersex issues into trans, you're speaking from a community you don't belong to, that kind of stuff.
I'm very, very lucky in that all the trans people that I know, because I actually was encouraged to start intersex activism by Lucia Blake, who runs Transmissions. And she kind of adopted me as a part of Transmissions and started encouraging me to do intersex activism. So her gender non-conforming and trans little activist group and meetups that Transmissions have always been inclusive for intersex people. And that's not, she was never saying that intersex people have to identify that way, but if you do identify that way, then you always have a welcome home here. And so I'm really lucky in that sense.
That's fantastic.
All the trans people I know have kind of referred to me as their siblings and sister, and I really, really, really appreciate that. So I'd have to thank the trans community massively for me being comfortable in who I am. So I don't know whether or not that's something that's changed over recent years, or if I've just got lovely trans friends.
Well, no, I've got more trans friends than I've got intersex friends.
Yeah.
And I've always found my trans friends to be absolutely I could say my trans friends as if they're separate from me, but I am trans as well. So I'm part of the same family. I think that when I started exploring both of my identities, so to speak, that's me. So that makes it sound sort of like I switched between the two, but exploring both of mine was when the really heavy and really nasty attacks on the trans community started. And I think there was a lot of defensiveness going on at the time where people were frightened and concerned about what was happening. And so me exploring that at exactly the same time, I think I was kind of maybe sort of prodding both camps at the wrong moment.
Well, at least they saw you as that. You weren't prodding anything. You were just being yourself.
Yeah, but it was people were being really defensive, I think, on both sides at that time.
Yeah, no, it's really sad. It's really sad. I think we massively need to be focusing on looking after each other and hearing each other's voices and looking after each other, rather than trying to make someone who doesn't necessarily, if someone's trying to put someone down because they're not exactly this way or whatever, you really, really are just doing exactly what the rest of the world has done to us. Do you know what I mean? It's every time an intersex person or a trans person or, a lesbian is exclusive to someone for whatever reason, gatekeeping in those ways, it's just imitating the things that have happened to us, growing up. And it's so sad and it's so toxic, and it really needs to change, because we more than ever now all need to be supporting each other, and we need to have a stronger community, and we can't be bickering within each other when we've got TERFs and the far right knowing exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, and they're attacking sort of like wanting us as intersex people to have operations that we don't want and stopping trans folk who want operations to having them. They're just attacking anyone that doesn't fit within their narrow gender conformity. You know, they sort of like want us to be like Stepford wives to fit into that narrow concept. Well, fuck that. I fit into no one's narrow concept. I fit into my own concept.
Yes. That was brilliant.
What do you think is the most pressing issue for intersex people in the UK?
I think representation and misunderstanding and silencing of intersex people. I think there's so little understanding of what intersex is, and really it makes it dangerous, because if no one knows what it is and no one understands what it is, it means that we have no power and we have no one we don't have anything protecting us, because like surgeries and hormones and stuff can be forced on people because no one knows that there's anything wrong with that, because no one really understands what intersex is.
Because operations were forced on me, hormones were forced on me, and my body rebelled as much as my mind did in puberty, because I think growing breasts really sort of made me realise that so much of what they were telling me wasn't so. That my family had lied to me, that my school was in cahoots with my family were doing, and that's incredibly impactful, that everybody that you trusted and believed in was lying to you for all of your life, basically. And I just got really lucky. I've had a really lucky life, and I've managed to come out of it reasonably sane.
Well done. It shows a lot of strength. You're very, very resilient.
Sometimes you don't have much choice. It's, you know, you have to live with what is and try and make the best out of it you can. But as far as me coming out as being intersex, as I say, relationships are so much easier to form when I was just plain trans, and I would come out usually when a relationship started to get intimate. It's to say that, you know, I'm also trans, I've also been through these various operation things, and, you know, if we sleep together, this is kind of what you're getting, and that kind of worked. But when you sort of add intersex into that, it's kind of like, whoa, you know, that's kind of a lot to take in, and I don't know what to do about that, so see you around.
It sort of ties in with something my friend Vanessa was saying, primarily about non-binary people, but I think it fits here in that society is so sex-based to its core that anyone, for any reason that deviates from that, is going to have a tougher time, because they challenge people's core idea on what the human experience is, or at least the core idea that they have been taught, probably more accurately put.
Yeah.
And so that's why, I mean, my friend Vanessa was saying that in regards to why certain people in the media are freaking the fuck out so much about trans people. I mean, it sounds to me that that could be also an aspect of being intersex. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, no, that makes I'd agree. That makes a lot of sense. But I think it is also important just to note that there are a lot of intersex people who do identify as a cis man or a cis woman. That is also some intersex people's experiences, rather than intersex or non-binary or whatever. You can be intersex and identify as a cis man and a cis woman. And I think in those situations, potentially it's a lot different. It's so difficult to encapsulate so many different experiences because it varies so unbelievably much.
Yeah. And I mean, you say we're always going on about, or they're always going on about like genitalia and stuff. And that is sometimes when you're an infant or a baby is where that first sort of thing comes in, where the doctor sort of like holds you up and goes, what do you want it to be? And that's kind of, for some of us, that's kind of like where it starts.
Okay, Diana and Izzy, thank you so much for talking to me and for sharing so much. I know these conversations probably aren't that easy or straightforward for you, so thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your knowledge. Where can people find you online, and do you have anything that you'd like to plug?
So my Instagram is at Izzy MacCallum, and then my intersex activism Instagram is Intersexy, which is spelled XXI. And our next Intersex club night and fundraiser is on the 21st of February. So second to last Friday of February, and it's going to be at Harpies. Yeah, and we'll be fundraising for Intersex Equality Rights UK. So if you want to come and help support intersex rights, then that'll be where that is.
Cool. Diana?
I'm new to Instagram, so I think it's just under me, Diana James. And the same with Twitter and with Facebook. It's just under my name. So whatever I write is just me, and I don't write for anyone else. And just no affiliated organisation that I work for, advise, or volunteer for.
It's
has
just
any
you.
Responsibility. It's just me, yeah. Everything I write is my fault. If you don't like it, then it's just me.
Well, you are enough. You are enough for anyone. Wait, that came out weird. I want that to be a compliment, and that sounded like something else. Diana, I hope you know what I meant.
Yeah.
Izzy and Diana, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Intersexy is the best name for anything ever. You can put that on the back of, you can put that on your posters, you can put that on your whatever. Ashleigh Talbot of What the Trans, best name for anything ever, Intersexy.
It really is.
It is, but I think that interview absolutely covered some of the things that I was thinking about, and that I know various other trans campaigners and trans people have been thinking about as well, which is that there's so much to it. We barely scratched the surface with that conversation, but there's, as well as us having our kind of differences in the specifics and perhaps in a biological sense or whatever, but there's so much that connects us too. There's so much that's valid about the conversations that we could have with each other. But I'm really, really glad we did this interview. And just to say to Diana and Izzy, who I assume are listening, hi guys, thank you both so much for joining us.
The next Intersexy event is going to be held on Friday the 21st of February at Harpies in London, and please check the link in the description for more details on that.
And since we are in the process at this very moment of wrapping up this episode of the show, you can also catch us on social media. We are on Twitter at What the Trans. We are, of course, on Facebook, Facebook.com/What the Trans. And brace yourselves for some big news. Hold your applause. Trumpets incoming. We have a shiny, brand spanking new website.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
What the Trans... What is it, .com or .co.uk?
It's .com. We are a .com.
Whatthetrans.com. Oh yes, we got the domain name and now we have a website. All of the old episodes of the podcast are there archived. We know we've had a couple of people mention to us that certain streaming services don't have the earlier episodes on it, and though being perfectly honest, you might want to skip over some of those anyway since the sound quality was really bad. Sorry about that. However, there's also a blog section on that now where we're going to be obviously doing a bit of blogging. All of the references that we use, all the link in the description documents, you can find them all there. So yes, whatthetrans.com. Do check it out. Share it with your friends if you like.
And a special thanks to Lexi, who is our webmaster using some 90s World Wide Web lingo.
I think she's definitely more of a web mistress. Certainly for me when she wears the spider outfit. Anyway.
Fair enough. I should probably put in here that Lexi is actually your girlfriend.
Yeah.
And she is also very, very good at website things. And so she did so much work to set this thing up for us and did all of the techie stuff that I do not understand. And I'm pretty sure you don't understand either.
Oh, gosh, no, not a clue. Not a clue.
We just sort of swanned in at the end and uploaded some images, basically. That was our contribution. Although I have written two smaller blogs. One which is a call of action for people of colour to please get in touch because we will make space for you on the show anytime. We will find an episode that is suited to your particular expertise. Obviously, there is no expectation for you to talk about race issues if you don't want to, but we just want to get more people of colour in the room. And the second blog is basically a call for action for people to, if they want us to host any writing on the website that they have written. But we don't want to make this into a thing where it's like, please send us your stuff, we will never pay you, because we can't pay you, we don't get paid ourselves. Only send us stuff if you are okay with that arrangement. If you don't want to send us anything, that is fine.
Yep.
Don't do it. If you think you can sell your words, get paid. I have been a working journalist. I know the importance of never doing something for free if you are good at it. So, but if you want a platform and you just want the words out there, we will help you do that. just get in touch with us on any of the social medias or through the website, whatthetrans.com, and we will have a chat and sort that out for you.
Absolutely. And one final thing, also internet-based, because pretty much everything is nowadays, we, of course, have a Patreon. Patreon. There's a link to it from our website, but several people have already so far been incredibly generous and are already supporting us. And they are Alexandra Lilly,
Anthony Pina,
April Heller,
Becky Scott Fairley,
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean,
Chris Hubley,
Claire,
In Search of Cara,
Lauren Onions,
Lenus,
Maddie Bell,
Matt Reynolds,
and Sophie Lewis. Thank you to every single one of you. Your contributions are allowing us to carry on doing this and host the website and host our streaming for the episodes that we do. So thank you all so much. And if any of you are able to, tell your friends or share it around, then obviously that'd be fantastic too. But yeah, we have a Patreon. Check us out.
Yeah.
Being all like professional and content creators and all that stuff.
Only took us like 20 fucking months, but we did it.
Yeah. It's fine. I mean, it was never on the list of priorities, was it? Until suddenly it was. Anyway, That's all from us. Thank you so much. And next week, in fact, is a little different because we're not doing an episode. So we're having a little break. Our next episode is going to be coming out in the first week of February, on or about the Friday, the 7th of February. So we will speak to you then. Thank you for listening. Look after yourselves and maybe look after each other. And goodbye.
Support and listen to Intersex people. Goodbye.